Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program here at the School of Visual Arts. My name is Michael Foley and I'll be your host this evening. We're going to have Amy Touchette as our lecturer and then it will be followed by a Q&A. It's a pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Amy Touchette. Amy is an artist based in Brooklyn who explores themes of social connectedness through street portraiture. Trained at the International Center for Photography, she began her artistic career as a writer and painter, earning a BA in Literature and Studio Art and an BA in Literature and Studio Art and an MA in Literature. She is represented by ClampArt here in New York City and Little Big Gallery in Paris, France. Her first monograph, Shoot the Arrow, a portrait of the world-famous Bob, was published in 2013. Her second monograph, Personal Ties, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, was published in January of this year. Other publications include the New York Times, the New York Observer, and the Woman Street Photographers and Brooklyn Photographs Now. Her photographs have been exhibited nationally and internationally. Personal Ties Bed-Stuy Brooklyn debuted at the National Portrait Gallery in London, England in 2019 as part of the Taylor Wessing Photographic Portrait Prize. She teaches portraiture in ICP's full-time documentary practice and visual journalism program and in their continuing education program. She also works as a freelance photographer, writer, and editor. She's written feature articles for publishers such as PDN, PDN Edu, Rangefinder, Emerging Photographer, and exhibition catalog essays. Amy is currently at work on several medium format street photography series, as well as Street Dailies, her ongoing series of impromptu portraits of strangers, which are released regularly on Instagram. So let's welcome Amy Touchette.
Hi everyone, you can hear me okay? Thank you for coming. I know it's freezing out. It just got cold, right? I just got my big winter jacket out. But it's a real pleasure for me to be here. And let me get this show started. Okay. So I have always had a very personal relationship to photography. The way it's affected my life and my personality has been very profound. And one of the magical traits of photography is that it holds a mirror to you. And one of the things that it showed me in its special unique way was that I was an introvert in an extrovert's body. So I'm completely at ease in a group of strangers, pretty much no matter what the scenario, but public speaking doesn't come naturally to me, but I'm really happy to be here. I do love our medium. I'm happy to be here to share my thoughts on it. So thank you, Michael, so much for having me, and thank you, SVA, Marco. All you guys make this so easy for me, very organized, and happy to be here. So I wanted to talk about the power of photographing today as opposed to photography or photographs, the wisdom that the act of photographing imparts. And the reason is because that's how it all began for me personally, and that's how, that's always been the best parts of it as I've continued as a photographer. So my infatuation with seeing actually started in 1997 when I moved to New York City. This place was so diverse. Everyone had so many stories suggested on their faces. I grew up in a very homogenous area. I came from San Francisco after that's where I went to grad school. And it was just, New York is like no other place, right? We all know that. I am a huge lover of New York City. And I particularly loved the subway when I got here because that was back in the day where people weren't on their phones and they actually like looked at you because they had nothing else to do unless they had their nose in a book, which, you know, or paper or whatever. So there was a lot of interaction and I really loved it. There was also a connection that I was feeling with people on the subway just by looking at New Yorkers. The power of eye contact really struck me. It just made me feel more alive and more real than I had in the past. And even though I wasn't using a camera back then in 1997, this is before I became a photographer, in retrospect, I feel like that's actually when I when I started photographing. All of these images were made like a decade later. So I don't know if you guys have ever read Ernst Haas' essay called The Joy of Photographing, but basically he argues in it that you learn to photograph so that you learn how to see, and really nothing else. Photographing teaches you how to see life, and he was even sort of arguing that, like, once you have figured out how to see, you can put your camera down and then just live your life seeing. That it's sort of a tool. Well, I'm not looking to get rid of my camera, but I do, that whole notion really is a lot of why I do photograph. So unbeknownst to me, New Yorkers were showing me that I had that proclivity and interest way back in 1997, even though photography wasn't at all on my mind. So you can imagine, and maybe you don't have to imagine because maybe you have vivid memories yourself, but when September 11th happened, I was devastated. I was living in the West Village, which was an area that was cut off to traffic, looked like Armageddon outside. There was the most putrid smell wafting through my apartment, the air. There were posters of everybody looking for their loved ones, and you knew they were gone. So anyway, I became acutely aware of the preciousness of life at this time, and also being such a New York lover. It was very painful. I was operating on a sense of fear. I saw pain everywhere, whether it was looking in my fellow New Yorkers' eyes or looking within and grappling with why this happened, how we can be so violent to one another. Also, my little brother had signed up for the Army a year before, in a time when we didn't really feel like war was imminent, and then suddenly it was. I was very worried about him, and rightfully so. He was one of the first troops sent to Afghanistan. He was there in Operation Anaconda in October. At the time, I was unhappily working as a managing editor, and to sort of offset my professional unhappiness, I was working on these large-scale oil paintings at home. They're like 3 by 7 feet of these jazz musicians, and just trying to offset like my sort of ill career move. And that seemed like a really silly way to live out the precious moments of my life. So I took as long as it would take, which ended up being like a month, to sort of figure out what I would want to do if all of the barriers were gone. And I started thinking about photography. So I enrolled at ICP in Jeff Mermelstein's Photo 1 class. I don't know if you guys know Jeff Mermelstein. He's an amazingly celebrated street photographer who continues to really impress me and inspire me. So I started taking these classes with Jeff Mermelstein. I didn't even know what an f-stop was, but I had a feeling that photography would get me closer to people, that it would help me connect with people, that it would help me learn how to build trust, which I just felt like seemed like the most amazing art you could even conceive of. I loved painting, I loved writing, but they were very lonely, they were very insular, and that was what was so missing in my life. And so this is one of the first photos I made, which is not a great photograph, but I just included it because I feel like it just shows how like desperately close I wanted to get. And so, you know, Jeff taught us all how to develop film and burn and dodge and the real basics. And 20 years or so later, you know, from today's vantage point, I can say that everything I need to know, I learn photographing people. So this talk is actually like a love letter to photography, because for me, photography is more like a lifestyle or a philosophy than a career ambition, and it's also gotten me through some more challenging times, so it also feels a little bit like a best friend. So actually I've been specializing in street photography the whole time, but that was my interest, as I said. But actually my very first project was a long-term documentary project on a woman named the world famous Bob. And so while I was taking continuing education courses at ICP, I was working on this project. So after Jeff Mermelstein's class, I took Photo 2, Photo 3, took a lighting class, a creative class. If some photographers would come through whose opinion I trusted, Mary Ellen Mark, Andrea Modica, I would take their classes. Basically designed my own program, having already had a BA and MA under my belt. I wasn't so excited about getting a full-time degree just yet. I wanted to make sure that this was the path for me. And so that's just how it progressed. So as I was learning photography, I was photographing the world famous Bob. And we were complete strangers. And as I said, I was really interested in learning how to build trust. And so the fact that we were utter strangers was important to me. I wanted to start from zero and learn how to do that. When I met Bob, I didn't meet her when I set eyes on her. She was performing, and immediately I just had sort of these visions of covering her backstage and offstage. At the time, I didn't know that she was a muse to many. Many people were interested in photographing her or painting her, and it all makes sense now that she was a larger-than-life entertainer, and a lot of people wanted to know what was underneath it all. But backstage was a highly guarded place for her. She even rejected Annie Leibovitz, who wanted her to sort of show her what's sort of behind it all, and she said no. And I remember she used to say to me, "Why can't they just enjoy the cake instead of asking for the recipe?" Which I just thought was so funny. Burlesque is like full of humor, and like that's just like part of her DNA. So she just always had these like funny ways of putting things. So, and of course I knew I was entering a sacred space. That was the whole idea. But I did want to go slowly. I wanted to learn how to manage a relationship like this. So I didn't push it. So for example, even though my wildest dreams, I would have gone out on a date with her and her boyfriend, I didn't impart that to her at the time. I didn't, tell her that I had visions of spending a morning with her in her home, or watch her transform into her burlesque personality, or accompany her on various jobs like art modeling at Tompkins Square Park Library. Or working at the vintage store. So instead, I met with her. I knew she was performing again. I went to the club. I got introduced to her, told her how much I loved her and what she did. Could I photograph her that night? And then maybe we could meet at a cafe and I'll show you images. And she was very nice, and so that's what we planned. So once I photographed her that night, we met up at a cafe and I showed her prints, and that's when I sort of dropped the bomb. When I was like, I want to do something deeper. I would like to do something more long-term. Maybe we could meet for 3-hour periods, and I would just photograph like whatever you're doing at that time, sort of suggesting, I don't want to just photograph you on stage. And she said, but what if I'm just doing my laundry for those 3 hours? And I said, then I'll photograph you doing your laundry. And I actually did tag along with her. But I really wanted her to feel comfortable at all costs. So I didn't want to like reject this notion of her doing her laundry as being like something that I wasn't interested in, because I was interested in it all. I cast a really wide net, but I wanted her to feel in charge. I wanted her to feel respected. I wanted her to feel like there was room for her, that actually we were collaborating, even though I was the one with the camera. But the truth is, and maybe you guys know this if you photographed performers, they have a very strong relationship to the camera. It's not like you and me, if you're like me, where I don't really like to be photographed. I mean, I do because I'm a photographer, so I allow people to photograph me, but it's uncomfortable. And there's a lot of judgment and whatever. She doesn't have those problems. So as a photographer, I had a different problem, which was, how do I photograph someone who's not, always gaming the camera? So after spending maybe 6 or 8 months with these 3-hour increment shoots, I asked if we could photograph for 24-hour periods. So meaning I would tag along and do whatever it was that she had going on for these 24 hours. I ate what she ate. I even slept in her bed with her. It was sort of a breakthrough strategy, if that's the right word. We became very close, and for me it was like sleepaway photo camp. It was so great to just only, I like basically slept with my camera. I was just so excited about waking up before she did, and it was just a really wonderful way of really focusing on photographing, and that was also before I had a cell phone. So it was like, you're just like, you're away from home, you're offline. So it was a really wonderful way for me to really get into the depths of photographing and to explore our relationship. And I did show her images as I went along, even like difficult ones like this, and she got it. Like, she understood and she trusted me, and we became friends. And she is my all-time favorite muse, no doubt about it. It was this super wonderful experience for me. And, of course, we're still in touch, and I will always care deeply for her. So after 4 years of photographing and another 4 actually of editing and sequencing, and looking around for a publisher, the book was published in 2013. So I would say the first thing that photographing people taught me was to be true and to go gently. So obviously I talked about, giving space to the world famous Bob. And I know that she responded to that, but I think under it all, my genuine desire to be with her, I keep talking about my needs of wanting to connect with people, but Bob was special to me. I wasn't using her to figure out those dynamics. It was an authentic desire to spend time with her. And I don't know if you guys have ever had like real lessons in mortality, but when you do, like, things get real pretty quick, and everything that's extraneous sort of melts away. So photographing, taught me to that people respond to authenticity, and that if you're coming from a true place, you've got a lot of bases covered. So at the time I was photographing Bob, I was also making sort of fly-on-the-wall traditional street portraits, street photography. But I started seeing patterns in people that really intrigued me. So I kept seeing people who were conjoined or reflected each other's style or mannerisms and sort of hung around with their twin. So I decided I would photograph these people who were far and few between. It definitely took me a long time to find these people, even though I saw them a lot. When you go out to photograph them, you're like, where were those people that, So I started this series called Us. And I moved from a Leica M7, which is a rangefinder, 35 millimeter, to a square, because I suddenly got very focused not on street vistas, but people. And I felt intuitively that the square would be better for that. It would just isolate them and be able to make them the focal of my images. So I started with the Yashica mat, which is like a $300 cheaper medium format camera, and then moved to the Rolleiflex 3.f planar once I realized that it was for me. And also once I went to a portfolio review, and Denise Wolf from Aperture was like, you need a better lens with my Yashica mat, which is like, this is why we go to portfolio reviews, because I'm learning, right? And I don't really know, I need a better lens. So just as an aside, shout out to Denise for helping me with that. So basically on the street, I was, distilling everything I learned in 4 years with Bob into a minute or less. I was very aware of people's time, so I didn't want to take up a lot of it. So in time, photographing also taught me the satisfaction of creative equilibrium and just how effective that can be. What I mean is, for the last 10 years, I basically have approached street portraiture using 2 different methods, 2 different cameras. Like I just mentioned, my Rolleiflex I use to make collaborative posed pictures. They're very methodical, and obviously they're film. For the first image, I give no direction. I just tell them to look into the camera. For the second frame, I might give them some direction, but the reason I do that is because I want the first frame. Again, I really never want people to feel rejected by me or by my camera, And so I like to give them as much space as possible to present however they want in the first frame. Some people like to be told what to do. All right, you know, it's your project. Like, what do you want me to do? So if that's the case, then of course, you know, I'll help them. But usually I like to give that space, and then, you know, maybe I'll refine it a little bit in the second frame. But that's it. Film is, you know, it's a much slower process. These images, you know, obviously I have to wait for them to be processed and things like that. Sometimes I sit on film series for months, years. They're not something that I release on the regular. And I also started to make these portraits more during the warmer seasons. And then actually I don't even develop my film until the fall. So I'll start photographing in like June. I'll stop around September, October, develop all my film, pray to the photographic gods that there's no light leak. And then in the winter, like, look at what I made, and also do all the other administrative stuff that, as you guys know, is aplenty as photographers. So, and this is a way for me well, first of all, there's just like a lot more photo opportunities, I feel like, in the warmer months in New York. You can make plenty of beautiful pictures of people in the winter, for sure. But this is just a way for me to really concentrate on photographing for months and months and months. Just only think about photographing and developing these relationships with people, even if they're fleeting, even if they're wordless. And then taking the time to look at what I got. And it was just a way of sort of focusing things for me. I constantly feel split in a gazillion directions, so this like really helped me, and I always knew what I was supposed to be doing based on where we were in the 4 seasons. And you know, like I said, these images, when they're collaborative, there's a very strong connection. There's like real deliberation. They're very methodical. Both of us, both me and my subjects, are really concentrating. And these last images that I was showing you are from the Young series, which is images that I made in Oahu and Tokyo and New York City about teenagers, just as an aside. I also, starting in 2012, got an iPhone and started making like candid, fast, unposed digital images, more in line of the traditional street photography, where you know, are trying not to talk, where you're trying to be a fly on the wall. And I have always really enjoyed this aspect of photographing, because I feel like it was something that was missing in my practice before, like this notion of being cavalier, which I was not at all with my expensive film. I was always thinking once, twice, 3 times before I would make a shot. Whereas with my iPhone, I could be cavalier, I could be loose, I could make sketches. Sometimes if I don't think I'm gonna get an image, like I'm really pretty sure I'm not gonna get it, I take it anyway. So, because I have nothing to lose. And just having that creative freedom, I find really helpful. And you know, it is a fleeting connection. These are all made without exchanging any words with them. And you know, maybe he looked my way for the second I made the picture, and then he looked the other way. A lot of times people don't know that I'm photographing them, or they don't care. Maybe I'm making a selfie, maybe I'm looking at a map. So I can make these very quickly, and I just sort of edit for eye contact, because that's a thing with me. Oddly, I turned to one picture that like doesn't have any eye contact, except I guess the guy in the back. But so this also coincided, getting my iPhone also coincided with Instagram. So I really enjoyed Instagram, and these images are actually an Instagram series, Street Dailies, that Michael referenced in the opening remarks, is an Instagram series. I push all my images through the filters. I use all the photo editing sliders. I crop. I have a ton of fun. And what Instagram supplied to me was just more of that looseness that I was talking about, where I could make, edit, and show and get feedback all in one day. So I do try to photograph. I do try to put something up on Instagram every day. that's sort of slowed down in recent years because you know, I don't want to make myself do anything, but they're up there pretty regularly, and I really enjoy that sort of not being too precious about making images, since with my film images I am quite precious about it. So these are made year-round as opposed to my film projects, which are, like I told you, made during the warmer months. And a lot of these are in between times when I'm on the way to the cleaners. I don't go out to make pictures with my iPhone. It's not like that. I just walk to the bank and I see some images, or you know, I always have this in my clutches, basically, because there are images everywhere, as we know. So what I meant about equilibrium is that working on these two opposite ends of the spectrum, film, so slow, digital, so quick, posed, unposed, collaborating, not collaborating, talking to people, not talking to people. It's a very productive way for me to work, and it kind of fills in a lot of the blanks. It's also supplies some counterpoints and interplay of extremes that I found really helpful. So another thing that I learned photographing is that the world operates on cause and effect. And maybe this is a very obvious thing to say, but I think really understanding this helped me understand the dynamic of photographing on the street. You know, the street is the Wild West, man. You know, it's always changing, totally unpredictable, and chances are if you make street photographs, that's what you like about it. But the question remains, so like, how are you gonna harness this horse or whatever? And I feel like just understanding that cause and effect has something to do with how the world operates can help you gain more control. It means you can just be more deliberate about how you interact. And how you're gonna initiate. So like, you're the one who's there, who wants to make the photo. How are you gonna get the portrait that you want? So obviously, one cause that you can imbue is, what are you gonna say? Your words. So, you know, you have a very short time to convince a complete stranger to spend time with you, even if it's a minute or two. So obviously, you know, finding the right words and in a short amount of time is very key. But what I've also found is that how you say those words is just as important. In fact, I came across a study where 93% of our perception of a person's emotional state is based on nonverbal cues. 93%. So 55% is body language, 38% is tone of voice, and words are a mere 7%. So obviously you're stopping someone on the street, you know, may I take your picture? You have to use words. But there's so much that comes across in your vibe. And this also touches on the mind-body connection that I find to be really helpful when you're photographing on the street. Just being aware that the headspace you occupy is something you wear on your sleeve. So like, it starts an effect. It starts a chain reaction. What's happening here is sort of the beginning of what you're emanating out into the world. So it's also extremely important that you sort of work out if you have any issues with photographing people on the street, if you have issues with consent, if you think it's unethical, blah, blah, blah. Those are all things that you have to straighten out before you actually get out there, because people will sniff that out, and they will, it will make photographing a lot harder for yourself. So one of the ways that I've figured out how to get the portrait I want, or one of the ways that I've made it more possible, is to be what I'm looking for. So I always want my subjects to feel calm and comfortable and genuine in front of the lens. And so that's the state of mind that I try to have when I ask them for their photograph. It's also like evoking the law of attraction. So you're putting a chain reaction into effect, and obviously people are coming from all different states of mind, and who knows where they were before, what's going on. Doesn't always work, but it's one way of gaining a little bit of control of the general public and the sensitivity that we need to cultivate when we're photographing out there. So one of the most valuable things that photographing imbued me with also is hope. So there is nothing quite like the exchange of trust with a stranger. So in my opinion, what makes street photographing so powerful is that the exchanges are short and anonymous. That's what makes them so meaningful. Far deeper than a hello or a good morning. Making a photograph with a stranger is the most unique, fulfilling burgeoning of trust I've experienced. And it reminds me never to give up on humanity, no matter what I read in the paper. You go outside your door and believe it or not, there's a lot of love out there. So, you know, and also when you're collaborating in the moment, there's no expectations. There's a very distinct, no strings attached transmission of trust. There isn't, because it's anonymous, because it's short. It's a very beautiful, albeit fleeting connection. So I started making this body of work that I've been showing for the past few slides. It's called Personal Ties, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, which also Michael brought up in the opening remarks. I photographed, this is my neighborhood that I moved to in 2015. I still live there. I photographed until 2018. I actually, 2019, I was gonna photograph, but I got busy with traveling, and then 2020 happened. Rather, COVID happened, and I felt like these images couldn't live with COVID images or post-COVID images. And so suddenly, much to my surprise, I felt like, wow, this project has ended. Like, put that down for like another weird reason why a photography series ends. You never know why it's gonna end. And so this is what happened to me. So suddenly it was wrapped up into a little bow, and I wanted to find a special place to show it. But anyway, I digress. When I was out photographing, it was really because I was new to the neighborhood. I really instinctively or intuitively is probably a better word, loved this neighborhood. It was very vivid, very interactive. People were around, and I really just wanted to get to know this new neighborhood. I'd lived in New York City since 1997, but Bed-Stuy felt different, and I was new. And a lot of what attracted me were friends, family members, couples, and that's partly why I called the series Personal Ties. And it was also about, as I've been sort of discussing all along, eye contact and just what that does. I've read that actually when you look someone in the eye, that oxytocin is released, which is a hormone that counteracts cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And when I read that, I thought, so this is what I was experiencing in 1997 on the subway in New York. I didn't really know why it was making me feel good to look people in the eye. I mean, I wasn't getting all up in people's business, but, you know, hello, a nod, you know, just an acknowledgement of one another is such a beautiful thing. And that's for sure been part of why I've been so obsessed with street portraiture and such a portrait junkie in general. And I think that if anything the pandemic has taught us, it's that if we stop looking at each other, like things get really bad pretty quickly, all around, especially strangers. Okay, so maybe we had our pod and we were looking at them maybe way too long, but it's about looking at strangers. I feel like we just like lose sight of one another if we don't see one another. So it's something that has been really important to me, and a huge realization about why I do what I do, and that it's not just an art, it's actually, it's like I said, like more of a lifestyle. So I photographed in a lot of locations, Malaysia, Vietnam, France, Mexico, the American South. But having these transmissions of trust in Bed-Stuy right outside my door, you know, on the sidewalk I sweep, you know, waving to people in the bodega, these transmissions of trust became personal ties too. So that's part of why the series is called Personal Ties. And this was made into a book in January, and Larry Fink, the photographer, wrote an adorable, well, I shouldn't say adorable, I think Larry's adorable. He wrote one of his amazing poems as the foreword, and also I had C. Joyce Sanchez write the afterword. She's a third-generation Bed-Stuy resident. There was a lot that I felt like my photographs didn't and couldn't say, and I wanted someone who grew up in the neighborhood, who really knew the neighborhood, to land viewers in a way that I felt my photographs couldn't. So she wrote the most amazing afterword, just a couple of pages about her experience growing up in Bed-Stuy, and really means a lot to me. I really feel like the book wouldn't have been whole without her. So the act of photographing also taught me that you are what you see, just like you are what you eat. And that's partly why I'm such a lover of photographing or seeing, because it's so all-encompassing, it's so multitudinous, and you know, it can sometimes get frustrating that pictures show such a small sliver of these exchanges that I have. I sometimes fantasize about bringing an audio recorder around with me, but it really is about seeing, and that what we see, it is also what takes over our mind. And so I'm, you know, probably no surprise to you, a strong proponent of a visual documentation of our history. I think that is key to our survival. Like, looking at strangers now and over time is how we make progress. It's how we learn to empathize. And you know, there's that saying, like, those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And this is something that I believe really strongly in, and it's why I'm still photographing people on the street with their permission, without their permission. For example, this picture by Robert Frank, Trolley, I feel like is so critical that we have as documentation, showing us, you know, where we've been. And then there's also just like the reason that we should photograph, so that we can show, you know, a 10-year-old or a 6-year-old that we used to have phone booths. And like, this is what we used to do. We used to cram in while mom was making a phone call. And, you know, so these are images that I think about as I go out and photograph. So it's not just about me connecting, but it's also making a record of what is now. And sort of, I guess this is my way of sort of defending the art of photographing on the street, because I think that there is a lot of discussion about consent nowadays. And I do push back a little bit on that, because I feel like having candid images of who we are is so important for the reasons I just said. And I also just included this one because this is my screensaver. I've been looking at it for 10 years, and it's an image that the New York Times released, 10 years ago, and it's this mama cat bringing her kittens across the street, and the cop stopped the traffic so that she could, you know, bring them. I mean, I don't know, is it just me? I like, these images make me want to cry. I love to see life then, you know, and it does, I do think I see these men, you know, if all of them had to give their consent, will you be in this picture, will you not? No, you know, we all get so hyped up about it, and there is reason to respect the general public and how you photograph on the street, and I'm not getting into that tonight. But I do think that it's important that we keep photographing, and I'm a huge proponent of that. And Jamel Shabazz, I don't know if you guys know his photographs. He has been photographing in Brooklyn for decades, and recently was saying, you know, it's getting really hard to photograph out there. And it kind of scared me. It also put a little fire in me, because I do so think it's important. I don't know what we would do without a visual documentation of our history, of our society. So I'm out there still. And then if you'll allow me, the last thing that I'm going to talk about tonight is that the act of photographing taught me that the meaning of life is to be alive. It's to be present to it, to be sensitive enough to it. It's to see and smell and touch and taste and listen and do all the things you can't do when you're dead. I don't know what else is going to happen, but I know that that is what we are here to do, to be alive. And photographing on the street is the act of listening, like not just with your eyes and your ears, but with every cell of your body. So for me, photographing has been a real conduit for the meaning of life. I feel like the meaning of life makes itself known in the details. It makes itself known in the everyday. And it makes itself known in every person. And when you're out photographing, you don't just get to bear witness to this meaning, but you come to understand that you're part of that meaning too. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Amy. First, I would love to hear you in like a meditation series app. Like your voice is so like calming for me, with or without the photographs. Like I could like maybe focus on a piece of work and you guide us through. That'll be next level. I would love to know about any effective tips that you have when it comes mostly to the publishing part, right? And consolidating your work and getting it out there. As a more of an emerging photographer, that's like the level that I need to cross and struggling about how to go about it, what to think about. So anything that you could share on your journey? Thank you.
Yeah, so my first book, I was shopping it around for quite a while until I found a publisher. And then when I did, they covered all the costs, but I had very little agency in how the book was created. And in my opinion, there are some serious problems with it. So that was a learning experience. But I met them through other people. I mean, I went to a party, I met a publisher, but it's like every publisher I met, I was sort of like, are they a good fit? You know, maybe I'll show them this. I had a little book that of like maybe 30 of the images from the world famous Bob. And so I sort of did that, you know, I hustled. With my second book, it was completely serendipitous. I realized that personalized Bed-Stuy was done. I wanted to find a really special way to show it. I wasn't thinking book the whole time. I was just thinking, I'm meeting my neighbors. And then I got an email from Martin Schilt of Schilt Publishing in Amsterdam saying, hey, you know, looks like you're doing great. Like, let's talk. I had met him in 2012 at PhotoFest, which is a portfolio review. So 8 years later, I'm getting an email from someone I met at a portfolio review. And so he didn't even know that this Bed-Stuy work existed. I was sitting on it. It wasn't on my website or anything like that. And so we had a Zoom, and I showed him the work, and he showed it to his graphic designer. And so we got started. I think what I would like to, I can't impart enough, at least how portfolio reviews have been important for me. And a lot of it is a long-term game. Sometimes people walk out of a portfolio review with an exhibition, but usually not. Usually it's just like, great, it was good to meet you. Or maybe it wasn't good to meet you, but those in-person contacts have been so valuable to me. And yeah, they are sort of like planting a seed. And I feel like when you're starting as a photographer, plant a bunch of seeds and don't get frustrated. Like just coming here, meeting, you know, I know you're working with Susan, like, you know, Susan knows a gazillion people. Like it's actually a small world, photography in a good way. Like after 10 years, you kind of know people. And, you know, it is a long-term game. Like, so to expect, you know, obviously some people have success really quickly, but most of us don't. Most of us are in it because we love it. And it matters what happens if you get published or you get but it kind of doesn't, you know? So I would say, like, be patient. I mean, another example is I went to the ARL portfolio review in 2017, and in 2020, I met the gallerist of the Paris gallery that represents me. And 3 years later, she contacts me. Like, I wasn't ready to show your images, but now I am. It's very interesting, you know, and I think what's great about that too is, I know for me personally, like, I don't want to work with anyone who's not nice, who's not productive. They cannot be a snob. I don't know if I hate anything more than snobby people. I just, life is too short. I can't deal with who you think you are, you know what I mean? So these are very important to me, and I feel like you can't really tell unless you meet someone in person. And then you keep in touch over the years, and they watch you grow, and you see what they're up to, and, you know, maybe you'll come and meet. And so, and this is how it was with Martin Schilt and me with this book. It was so serendipitous. I wasn't even hustling it, because the summer of 2020, I was just trying to be sane, you know, so I was photographing on the beach, just trying to get air. I didn't even know what I was doing. So there's a lot, I think there's a lot of just like seed planting and, you know, meeting people and looking at where your work probably fits in. Knowing the history of photography is helpful, because various people are involved in various styles, and that would be my advice. Does that help? Okay.
Another question for Amy?
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Susan.
Do you get a lot of pushback when you're photographing your children? And these days, it's really tough. The parents don't want them to be on social media, and I'm just wondering how you deal with that.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, I will say that it's legal to photograph children. You know, it's not illegal. So you have the law on your side, but that doesn't address, you know, moral or ethical positions that people might have. I do think there are some people who are under the impression that it is illegal, but if you get pushback on the street, like, going to the law thing isn't necessarily going to help you get out of that situation, or try to transform someone's idea of photography. I do feel like a lot of people don't know what street photography is, and they have no idea why you would want to take a picture of a stranger. So in many ways, you're sort of an advocate of photography when you're out there, and I do think a little bit about, you know, telling people what it is I do and why. If the parents are around, you know, I'll look, maybe give a little wink, or try to, you know, connect with them in some way, like, is it okay? A lot of times the parents aren't around, and I just go for it. And I can sleep at night, because I, as a rule, make portraits of people that are celebrations of them. I never photograph people who are down and out, who are drunk, who are homeless, who are picking their nose. You know, all of those are considerations. If there's someone who's living out some drama on the street that any rational mind would know they'd rather not be living out in public, I don't photograph. And have I broken those rules? Yes. And did it surprise me? Yes. Like, it was almost like there was a different brain here on this finger that, you know, clicked the shutter. But, you know, this is sort of my comportment on the street, and I just try to make it work. So, you know, if a parent gets upset, I delete, you know, but I don't delete without them asking me to delete first. I never offer to delete, because I try to work it out, like, because it's a lot about, they don't know me. They don't know that, well, I think I'm a good person, so they don't know that I'm a good person. They don't know that I'm not up to no good. They don't know that I'm not a pedophile, but they, you know, when's the last time you met a woman pedophile? So sometimes being a woman actually works in your favor, right? So, you know, and we each have, I think that the gender thing can be over talked about as far as how it helps you or not, but I do think, you know, it doesn't hurt for once.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to take it in the back here.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good, how are you?
Good, thanks. I know you spoke on it briefly, but I just kind of wanted to know how you kind of remain just kind of like unseen when you're doing street photography.
How I try to be unseen?
Yeah, and like your body language and your demeanor when you're in a setting that is like maybe you might be even an outsider, or just like you just don't want to like make the person uncomfortable or lose that moment. I think a lot of times that happens where it's like you see something and then you wait too long and then it's gone. Yeah, how do you kind of go about that?
Well, first of all, I do think like thinking through one's thoughts about photographing people without asking their permission first is really important to do before you actually go out there and photograph, so that you've thought about how you want to handle things. Like I was saying, for me personally, just knowing my parameters, who I photograph and who I don't, helps me operate with some confidence and peace as I'm milling about, because I know I'm not up to no good. So a lot of it is yeah, like that mind-body connection. Like if you're cool with what you're doing inside, you know, you sort of wear it on your sleeve, and other people notice that whether they know it or not. Like that's where intuition comes from, right? I just had a feeling. No, you didn't. They were, I mean, you did, but actually you were just observing something that you didn't even know you were observing. So I think that's a lot of it has to do with like really thinking through who you are as a street photographer before you go out there, so that you can answer to yourself, because there are going to be some people who said, did you just take my picture? What are you going to say? So there's a lot that you can think about before you go out there that will allow you to mill about with confidence. And then, you know, the second thing I do is I'm very quick. I try to be really quick. You know, I'm using an iPhone, which is the most, you know, undercover camera around. You know, like I'm assuming Gary Winogrand would have used it if he were alive. You know, like he was always talking about wanting to be invisible. So I'm using a camera that's not like my Rolleiflex, like the big, you know, thing that is practically another person in the room. So I'm really quick about it. And then also, you know, one way of being unseen is to be like very seen first, and introducing yourself, or just like being there. Yeah, I'm waiting for my car. I'm waiting for the mechanic to finish my car. Me too. Hey, how you doing? Yeah, and you're like, oh, these people have like these great faces. And then you take a picture when they already know you're there. They know you're milling around, and they just go on and do their own thing. So then you get an opportunity to create one of those more candid images, even though they know you and they know you're there. You just can't tell in the picture. So I would say those are the things that help me. It's fun. It's challenging. It's hard. But you know, I edit for the eye contact moments, and those are very fleeting. So I do think, for the most part, like once I see an image, it's probably too late. Like I do try to anticipate, so I'll start photographing before I think the picture exists, because again, I'm looking for that eye contact. So like if I feel like someone's eventually gonna look my way, I'm gonna start making pictures. And then they look for the bus, and that's my picture. And then I keep going, a couple more frames. It's a trick that, you know, isn't as old as the day is long. Is that the expression? But you know, every photographer knows that that's a great way to get candid pictures. Is just, you know, start before people know you're starting, and end after they think you've, you know, keep going after they think you've ended. So.
I want to hear a little bit more about the eye contact and the serotonin, and what happens if they're looking away, or do you ever allow that? Or I mean, I didn't see much of your pictures where people weren't looking into the camera, and I just would like to see if you can elaborate more, especially on the part where they're not looking into the camera and what that does.
Yeah, I do. I really like the moment we meet, and I feel like part of that is because it exploits something that photographs do really well, which is allow us to stare at a moment that may have been a fleeting one. And so for me, the moment that our eyes meet is super special. So I try to capture that. I've always felt like a real connection. I don't know how you can feel connected to another human being if you don't look them in the eye. So it's something that I always found compelling in a photograph, and I always found compelling as I was photographing. So it's something that I look for. The fact that oxytocin is involved when we look at one another is something I just sort of stumbled upon, but it made sense to me because I was wondering why I felt better looking at people in the eye. I mean, it really, you're just, you know, acknowledging another person's presence, but we're all so similar. I just think it really helps. And again, if the pandemic proved anything, it's that things get ugly quick, man, when you're not looking at your neighbor and you're not looking at strangers. It gets bad. You forget about one another. You get insular. I mean, I should say, I forget about people. I get insular. Like, I'm not trying to put this on you guys, but, you know, the data's out there too. It's not a good thing. And I really feel like it could be our demise. And I'm a natural born optimist. But as technology gets more and more involved in our lives, and we hear about teenagers who are texting from, you know, house to house instead of hanging out or sitting next to one another and texting, I don't know, it worries me. It worries me. I feel like the interaction is really key, and we forget what other is, and that's, aside from really dangerous, really uninteresting life. I mean, good God, you know, like that's what life is. Like, it's everything. And if it just becomes one thing, what's the point, you know? And then we don't learn, we don't progress because there's no one else putting their hat in and saying, well, what about this? Or just, you know, everyone's talent. There's a lot to lose. So there's a lot to fight for.
Alan, do you have a question?
Thank you very much. There are a dozen things you've touched on that really resonate with me, and photography that I used to practice. I'm a landscape photographer now, so I don't have quite that relationship thing. But I remember thinking that one of the things that's nice about portraiture is that it takes two people to make it, or more than two people, more than the photographer, that it's about and you mentioned the collaboration. And I think it comes out really well in your work and really interestingly. And one of the things I notice is that there is this kind of positivity to the relationship that I see. And I'm kind of interested if you're like conscious of that as something that isn't so much in the history of photography, because for instance in Robert Frank or in Diane Arbus, I mean, I was really looking at the twins and comparing them to like the twins in Diane Arbus, where there's a whole sense of the weirdness of life, whereas here there's a sense of like the commonness of life, or the connection of life. And your photographs often don't seem to treat other people as other so much as they treat them as the same. And I'm just kind of curious whether you think about that, in the tradition of photography, and or am I just talking through my hat?
No, you're talking through a mask. No.
Sorry.
I think about it. I've thought about it after the fact. I mean, when I started photographing, making street photography was super unpopular. Maybe it still is, but you know, I just wanted to be genuine. So it's like I liked what I liked, and I just sort of did what I liked and kept going with it, and would feel my way around on the street. But after, you know, looking at the prints and analyzing them and being like more thoughtful about what I was making, I do see, and especially in comparison to Diane Arbus, who's a major inspiration of mine, I remember reading somewhere where she's like, essentially when you look at someone, you see their flaw. And I was like, that's so interesting because I totally don't, you know? And I think that's why she makes her pictures, she made her pictures, and I make mine.
Right.
And I don't know exactly how to further analyze that. I just know that that's a big difference, you know? And I mean, the street is, you know, I'm painting it as this like place where you know, get hope and you understand the meaning of life, but part of that is also absorbing like some really difficult things about life. So I don't know. I feel like there's you start to, I started to really enjoy everybody, and everybody suddenly seems to have a story to tell. And I think the reason that I choose some people rather than others is because some people wear their story better on their sleeve, and a camera can only pick up, you know, what is a photograph, light on surface. It can't read someone's mind. So if they don't wear it somewhere, you know, whether it's in their wrinkles or their shirt or, you know, the scooter they're driving or whatever, then it's harder to see that person. So I do think about that. But I like to think that all of my pictures are celebrations of people, even if they're, you know, in a pretty neutral way. Yeah.
Well, they are to me.
Thank you.
Good. Any last questions? Okay, good. Amy, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you, guys.
being here.